Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of AUHSD Future Talks. I am your host, Michael Matsuda, the Superintendent of the Anaheim Union High School District. And as our 8,000 podcast listeners know, this show is dedicated to the future of education for America's youth. And today we are very lucky to have an amazing, innovative superintendent out of Vista, California, Dr. Matt Doyle, superintendent, and amazing things he's done. We're going to go deep into a deep dive, but I want our listeners to know that he's responsible for leading the design and implementation of the district's strategic plan, but equally as important, he's been involved in the a lot of big thinking about the profile of a high school graduate and what that means. So we're going to do a deeper dive on that. But Matt Doyle, welcome to our show.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Michael.
Okay, so what we normally start with, Matt, is a little bit about who you are, where you grew up, some of the personal things, and then how you became who you are now.
Well, this is my 36th year in education. I've been a teacher for 14 of those years. And as I moved out of the classroom, went into a whole variety of different administrative jobs, assistant principal, all the way up, of course, to superintendent. So it's been a fantastic career. I love it. One interesting aspect of my teaching career people don't often think about is that most of my teaching career I taught in Spanish, not English. So I'm a bilingual certified educator. So a lot of my area of expertise pedagogically is in second language learning and how we support our students who are learning English as a second language. So everyone in my family is a teacher. So it's just education is in our blood, and we love working with kids and parents.
So when I first heard about you, it was about your work with this development of the profile of a student and of an adult. You know, what does it mean to be part of a K-12, pre-K-12 institution? And I think that's the big question now. So you were very much ahead of your time when you did that, because a lot of districts are grappling with that. Could you share with us how that came about?
Yeah, we started with this concept of how can we think differently about the experience our students have in learning more than 10 years ago with our Framework for the Future 1.0. And that's when we started to kind of scratch out some general ideas about what a graduate profile would look like. And over the course of the past decade or so, we've just been more and more engaging with our community and our students around how do we refine what the skills and dispositions students should have, know, and be able to do upon graduation. And just recently, the last 2 years, we've reset our graduate profile, and we've actually shifted the terminology during this process. And that's important because this last go around, this new refresh we call our Framework for the Future 2.0, involved hundreds and hundreds of members of the public, more than 500. And we took 11 months to kind of really engage, dig in with our community and talk about what students should know and be able to do in this increasingly complex world that we all know and see. And during that process, we were really careful to have parity between adults giving feedback on what the future of Vista should be and students. And so this was our first time 2 years ago that we had a very large student presence in the design process of our new learner portrait. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But we also we're really careful to include students at the youngest grade levels. Believe it or not, we actually had kindergartners on the panel, all the way up through, and we have a robust adult school as well, and an adult transition program. So we had more than 200 students across all grade spans participate in the design process. The interesting thing, and this gets closer to answering your question, the interesting thing about this process is we started with an already fairly robust graduate portrait. And during that process, the kids felt like, the students across all ages felt like they felt like it was missing the representation of the students in the other grade levels. And that's how we migrated away from using graduate toward learner. And then it also, the original language around it was profile. And the students didn't like that terminology either. They felt like that might be too closely associated with profiling. So we shifted that to portrait. What do students look like, and do we know them in meaningful ways? It was a really fun migration from our graduate profile, which was very successful for 10 years for us, to this learner portrait. And the thinking behind it is all students, while they're aspiring to graduate, are learners, and we should amplify and elevate their work toward being ready for an increasingly complex and dynamic world of work. So that's the idea behind that. And there's two more caveats to it that we did not plan when we went through this process. As we were thinking about what those skills and abilities of graduates should be, students again pushed back, interestingly, during this process and said, well, what about the adults? I mean, if you're going to have something for the kids, what are the expectations for the adults? Because shouldn't they change too to get ready for an increasingly complex world? We did not plan that, Michael, believe it or not. That was like organic. And so, of course, we all said, yeah, you're right. They kind of called our bluff from an adult perspective. And we said, we should develop an adult portrait as well. So we went through that process. We developed an adult portrait. What are the skills and dispositions adults should develop over time to better meet the needs of our kids? And then they took it one step further than that, again, unplanned, and they said, now that we have our learner portrait and we've all agreed that we should have an adult portrait, how do we spend our money? And should our money be focused on this learner portrait? So then we develop what we call a system portrait, and those key elements of the system to make sure that we put our money where our mouth is. So that's how we ended up with this trifecta of a learner portrait, an adult portrait, and a systems portrait. So it was kind of a happy way it happened. We weren't expecting it, but it was there. That's what's great about having authentic forums in the community.
I love that, and the interaction and the input you had from students, and there's such an often ignored element of, when we do the feedback and input, oftentimes we give lip service to that, but that is just amazing. It's an amazing story. What are some of the, off the top, what are some of the elements of a learner portrait? And then I'm going to ask the same question with the others too, with the adult portrait, but let's start with the learner portrait.
So the learner portrait, we really dug into, spent a lot of time, I mentioned 11 months, and we were able to condense it down. As you all know, when you develop things like this, they have to be easy enough for people to see and understand. And so we have a complex version, a detailed version we call the detailed portrait, and then we have a simple version of the portrait. So our simple version of portrait really is boiled down to 3 components. The first component is how we help students develop as kind and confident learners. And within that, they have things like being positive and patient and appreciative and reliable and responsible, those types of things. The second component of our learner portrait is this idea of how do we light the fire of curiosity in our students to make them curious about the world and curious about their skills and abilities. And then the second component of that is this sense of connectedness. Are they connected to other learners? And more importantly, are they connected to our community in meaningful ways? So we call that curious and connected. And then the final component, the third component, is this idea of how do we build their self-esteem so that they see themselves as capable and knowledgeable? And that's the whole academic element of the portrait, is how are we instilling in them a sense of confidence and ability so they can be capable, knowledgeable, and bring that capability, a sense of capability and knowledge into the world of work. So students develop, for example, and apply a deep core academic knowledge and skills that makes connections to and across subject areas. So kind and confident, curious and connected, capable and knowledgeable. Those are the components of it.
So this is really great. And I think the big question following this interesting election that we just went through is what are schools' responsibility in terms of building capacity for critical thinking and a sense of a disposition of skepticism toward where you're getting your information from. So how would you say that your three drivers of the learner fit into that?
Well, one of the thinkings behind these three categories as we went through it with our community was, how do we build a learner portrait that can stand the test of time? So there's not like a timestamp on it. Similar to, and I know you work closely with Michael Fullen and the work he's done, which is global competencies, right? And those deep learning concepts. So we developed these to be broad enough to say these are the skills and dispositions learners should have, regardless of how sophisticated the world becomes. You need to be kind and confident. You need to have this curiosity and an appreciation for connectedness. And you also need to continue to develop your levels of sophistication.
So I really think that it's nested in curiosity and this connectedness to others, right? Yep. In terms of, because our young people are being bombarded with hatred toward others, or a lack of, or just blind acceptance of whatever they get in social media. So I really think that your driver that focus on the sense of curiosity, like I'm curious about the word, I'm curious about where this information comes from, but also importantly, the connectedness to other students, right? So I know that this kind of feeds into the teacher or the adult profile, right? Because how do you get to that? How do you train teachers? And then, so let's talk a little bit about the elements of the adult profile and how that connects to the elements of a learner.
Yeah, so again, I mentioned that this was an organic development. We did not design this from the beginning, which makes it even more powerful. So during these conversations with students and community members, we asked the question, if we're trying to create expectations of students for a kind of future forward approach to where the world is going and how things are becoming increasingly sophisticated, what are the change elements that we're expecting of the adults? And when we say the adult, just to become clear, it's not just the classroom teacher. There was much debate about that. And everyone agreed it has to be every adult on campus, including the custodian, including the office receptionist. And the pleasing thing for me is that all of those members in our community love the concept that they've been included. So the elements, we boil them down again to three components of the adult portrait. The first one is that we need to shift away from adults being the vessels of all the answers and all the power, and we need to shift them toward being a compassionate champion of learners. Ultimately, our job is to amplify and elevate our learners. The second component of it is that adults need to learn how to be flexible and innovative. And most importantly, a facilitator, not a controller of learning. And you know that as an educator, that it's not sage on the stage anymore. It's this support system aside students to let the students be the center. So flexible and innovative. And then finally, we want our adults to be open-minded, to be ready for new things. We all know the world's changing really fast and they should be open-minded. And then we added, and our board and our community truly believe in this, they need to be equity-centered. They need to recognize the power of equity. I think you mentioned that earlier. And the power of how our learning environments can either lift up or they could break down learners.
So how do you make that happen with the adults? Like, we live in a world that, there are some elements in terms of the teacher's contract, for example, that, you can't make people to do that. This has got to come internally, right? In terms of these dispositions. So and it's really a cultural change you're talking about. How have you gone about building that culture? Yes. I think this is great. I mean, the stuff that you've just described is wonderful.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's ultimately about culture, right? So you can't tell people what to do. They have to want to do it because you create a culture that invites them to consider the possibilities. So, like, for example, the second area of focus as an adult, flexible and innovative facilitator. One of the things that we do with our district-wide professional development days is engage them in professional collaboration and learning that they can co-create with other teachers around this concept of where's the future, and here's how we engage them and spark their curiosity as learners. We actually start those with like really impactful presentations about the future. And we all know if you're going to look at what's happening in the future and how things are speeding up, that's going to cause people to think thoughtfully about, wow, this thing's really speeding up. What's my role and how can I engage in innovation? So I think this idea of creating opportunities for staff to co-create learning experiences that prepare them for an increasingly complex world really makes them feel like they're part of the change and not the change isn't happening to them. I think that's the big thing that we're doing. Another element that we're engaging in, I mentioned earlier, Michael Fullen and the work he's doing, is trying to help people understand what are global competencies, what are some key elements, dispositions that students and teachers need to have in order for us to be viable in the future. So I think that's beginning to lay the foundations of a culture of change and a future forward thinking, mindset about where education is going. Now, just as a quick caveat, our district has always been focused on innovation. Our tagline has been excellence and innovation. So we've been doing this for 10 years. So we've been building this culture over many years, not just a few.
So I love the fact that you've looked at systems too, and you're talking about portrait of a system. And that's like that third leg of the stool, which is so vital to institutionalize. Could you describe what that means?
Yeah, so again, our system portrait was the last one we developed. Again, we initially did not intend to develop this. It came out organically. And that includes things like building an inclusive culture that's focused on growth. So acknowledging inclusion and the importance of that, equity, empathy, inclusion matters. Strength-based is an element of that. The second element of it is this concept, and you mentioned at the beginning, joy. And how do we create environments that inspire joyful learning, but also have expectations of rigor and making sure that there's innovation in there. So cultures of joyful learning, educational rigor, innovation, systems that promote care, belonging and connection, those elements of it. And then I mentioned earlier, future orientated and forward thinking. This idea of we should be thinking 5 miles down the road, we should not be thinking about tomorrow. And how do we prepare our students? And I always remind people, a kindergartner is not going to have a job until like 2038. And so people have to think about, we're preparing these kids for 10, 15 years from now, not for tomorrow. And I think sometimes we get caught in this time warp of, we're preparing the 12th grader to get a job tomorrow. That's true, we are, but we're ultimately preparing a kindergarten kid to get a job in 2038. So we need to be future forward. And then finally, perhaps most importantly, we've been a district that's always focused on how do we continue to deepen family and community partnerships? And what do those partnerships look like? And that's inclusive of our businesses. And how are our businesses partners in education? So
this is a great segue to this next piece here, is about your work in building this ecosystem that leads to careers, right? This is superhighway that you're building. Yep. How, okay, so let's talk about that in terms of these career pathways, and you're building on student strengths, and you call it, you're transforming this whole superhighway into a talent capital highway. Right. For the global marketplace. Yep. That's a big challenge there. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, go big or go home, right? I mean, you gotta, if these are kids, the kids are only in school once. We need to have high expectations for our organization. So I agree that it's pretty audacious. But let me explain the term career superhighway, because that was developed organically with our students and staff as well. So the concept of the career superhighway is, and Vista is a TK, actually a preschool to adult ed program. So it's a super long pathway, right, for students. And so the way we try to explain it to kids is we need to start as early as possible having conversations with them about what their strengths are. what their interests are, and what their aspirations can be in the future, and how we can engage them in conversation about what's possible for them in the world of work. And that should start in elementary school, right? It doesn't mean that they choose their path, but they should start having conversations about that. The reason we use the term superhighway is because oftentimes kids in poverty, or kids who might be special needs, or other types of students, they oftentimes during the course of their learning are interrupted. There are blockages in their learning, just like if you're driving a car down a neighborhood and a ball rolls out and you have to stop your car, or another car pulls out and you got to stop your car. There's all these interruptions in students thinking about what's possible for their career aspirations. And so a career superhighway is a metaphor to help us think about how we can remove the barriers and create opportunities for kids that they can see pathways that are not interrupted. And I want to go back to, more importantly, it's the kids who are at the poverty level or facing some serious challenges with their learning that are often interrupted in terms of how they see themselves in a career. So that's the concept of the career superhighway. And the idea is that all of our students are engaging in many different exploratory opportunities to think about themselves in a career that currently they don't see or currently doesn't exist.
What has been the response from the business community to this big, audacious idea?
Yeah, so we are in northern San Diego County. So northern San Diego County has a number of kind of hubs for business. One of them is advanced manufacturing, so kind of clean manufacturing. There's a lot of biomedical in northern San Diego County, and various other types of businesses, but we've been hugely successful. There's an initiative in North County called Innovate 78, for which we're part of. And we've worked really closely with the Vista Chamber of Commerce and the Oceanside Chambers of Commerce around internships. And so we actually have an ongoing relationship with our local chambers of commerce and engaging our students in internships. And there's two levels of internships that we provide. One is during the school year, where they do internships and they get credit for graduation toward that internship. And then there's another set of internships we do over the summer where they're paid internships through the Chamber of Commerce, so students can get paid but also do some internships. And it's exploded. All of our businesses are interested in it. We actually are running out of space for our students to participate. And then the other level of work we're doing is with the San Diego Workforce Partnership, which is the regional hub for workforce development. And we just engaged, we're the first school district in the county of San Diego. There's 42 school districts in the county of San Diego. We're the first ones to have a pre-apprenticeship program. And that's with the Building Trades Association, which is going, as you can imagine, crazy with all the work and the need for workers and electrical, plumbing, the blue economy with shipbuilding, welding, and other things. So we now have a pre-apprenticeship program which engages students in the pre-process before they can be accepted into one of the union jobs. There's quite a bit that we're doing.
All I can say is, wow, Matt. So the other question that I think superintendents and others interested in this type of work is, what does the architecture look like at the district? Like just in this area of apprenticeships? I mean, you have people in charge. What does that look like?
So we specifically, and this is something we've had for a number of years, but we specifically created a director of innovation. That's unique. Not every district has that. So we actually have a director of innovation. That's an educator who has a lot of skills and abilities in that area, Dr. Shigela. And then we also have a coordinator of career pathways. And that coordinator works with all grade levels, not just at the high school level, kind of supporting and promoting different opportunities for internships. And then we have a separate internship teacher on special assignment who's fully released from the classroom to help coordinate all the various internships across our high schools and our middle schools. So we have a pretty robust leadership structure to ensure that what we have in our portraits, we can deliver in the learning environment.
Well, I know we're just about out of time, Matt. Any other advice that you have to aspiring superintendents and leaders?
Yeah, I mean, the best advice I could give is look to other superintendents and other school districts and follow their lead. You've heard me say this before. We've been watching your district for years, your leadership, Michael. I personally appreciate it. And I have to say, we're a couple steps behind in a high school district, but we love it. And that's how you learn, right? You look for other districts who are doing great things and you try it out on yourself. And just like any district, every district has its own personality, so it might develop a little differently. But that's the best way to learn, is to look outside. I always say, look outside to grow inside. So if you look outside and learn from others, your district can start to do amazing things.
Well, you're doing amazing things. I'm very interested in the work that you're doing, and we look forward to hearing more, Matt. On behalf of all of our listeners, thank you for your time.
It's my pleasure. Great talking with you, Michael.